So, we've come to the end of Ted Lasso, and it does very much feel like the end. I'm not expecting or even wanting a season 4 or any spin-off shows or anything. Endings are primarily what we're going to talk about today. Well, that and one big issue I do have with this episode, but I'll explain that in a bit. A long time ago, I made a video called Feeling Empty When a Good Show Ends, which is common, I think. People also call it post-series depression. Over the course of a show, you might lose yourself in its world, become emotionally invested in its characters, and then suddenly that's it. They have been so much a part of your life all of this time, but suddenly you have to go on living yours completely separate from that world. There's a grief there, and our lives are full of endings, well, beginnings too, and middles, but endings can be hard, and sometimes that can make it hard for us to navigate them, which is why endings in stories are so important. If they can give us a positive experience of an ending, a positive sense of closure, what a good ending can be like, that can hopefully help us to learn, help us to better process the endings we go through in our own lives. Is this a bit of a dramatic way to start the video? Probably, so let's actually talk about the episode then. Ready? So despite some criticisms I will get to, I do think this episode stuck the landing. I very much enjoyed it. Ted, as was strongly inferred last episode, was going to go back home at the end of the season, so we saw him finish the season with Richmond and then go home. Job done. But it's the natural conclusion to his arc, and the idea of leaving works perfectly to provide a sense of closure to the show. We get to experience other characters saying goodbye to Ted just as we are saying goodbye. And I think they were very conscious of trying to provide a goodbye for us. Hence why we got a montage to look back on the show, we got a team saying farewell, we got Ted then saying it in a speech, we got Rebecca and Beard and a final look to the camera as if to directly say goodbye. And in a lot of shows you couldn't get away with doing that stuff, that kind of half stepping out of the plot to provide a direct goodbye for us all. Certainly not in a high tension drama, but in a warm-hearted drama sitcom type thing, I think it works well. They are leaning heavily into the sentimentality, and why the hell not? As such, we get a very rosy montage to wrap up a lot of stories. A montage that I half wonder if it was Ted dreaming this while he was on the plane or something, or just imagining the sort of lives these characters will have in England without him. I don't think that is the case, it's just that slight feel to it, which might explain why all the shots are so incredibly sunny when it's supposed to be England. But either way, it does a nice job of concluding arcs, even for some old minor characters that at the least are brought back for this episode, having them crop up for one last hurrah. That gives it that added feel of a cycle being completed, everything coming together for this satisfying ending in a symbolic way. So we have whatever the hell this guy was called, Sharon popped up, the Ussy bloke, George Cartrick, Sassy was back, Higgins' family, Zava's avocado, the Greyhound now wearing a helmet. There's even mention of Jack Danvers in the news, and Shandy running her own successful dating app, and so on. And there's also many parallels to moments from earlier episodes as well, all of which symbolically makes the ending feel twice as concluded and satisfying. I suppose my point then is that they've thrown absolutely everything they could at trying to give a strong sense of ending, and yeah, I reckon there are probably people out there who could criticise the hell out of this for going too far into that, but I think it's quite nice. There's a lot of genuinely moving scenes in here, especially when all of this sense of ending comes alongside the important point raised in Roy's story here. Higgins says,
human beings never going to be perfect, Roy. The best we can do is to keep asking for help and accepting it when you can.
Which is perhaps the main message of the entire show. And yeah, just because we get endings, because we get closure sometimes with things, doesn't mean absolutely everything is perfectly resolved and there's nowhere left to go. Okay, sometimes in fiction, but not in real life. We have endings of sorts, and we take lots away from those experiences, but we take them with us into a new stage of our lives, and I'm glad a point like this was emphasised to offset just the happily ever after feel. We then kind of get the best best of both, I suppose. The sense of a world that has been resolved, but also the hope and the ability to see these characters living on, still growing, still changing. Roy is now going to therapy. That's interesting. Keely and Rebecca are planning to start a Richmond women's team, which, yeah, it feels kind of weird that they don't have one. Also, someone let me know if I missed this earlier in the show, but Kaylee's KJPR sign now says KBPR, which I assume means Keely Barbara PR. I don't know if that was explained, but it's a nice little addition to see. The best endings, I think, are a mix of both those points, though. The resolution and the hope for life to keep on going, even without us there to see it. These people will miss Ted, but they don't need him anymore. You don't always get endings like that. It's what therapists strive towards, reaching a place where, yes, the client will miss you and you will miss them, but where they don't need you the way they once did. Endings often provide new beginnings, which is quite obvious when I say it like that, but it is always still quite powerful. And it's kind of for this reason I'm glad Rebecca didn't leave with the if Ted goes, I go mentality. She was finding it hard to envision the future at Richmond without Ted's there, but there is one. That's precisely the point. That's what they've all helped build, a family, an institution at Richmond that, like the best football clubs, can survive losing a manager. Also, selling 49% of her shares to the fans was a nice touch as well. Although I do kind of wish it had been 51% in honour of Germany's 50+1 system, where to protect clubs from investors that might not always have the best interest at heart, no German club is eligible to play in the Bundesliga unless at least 50+1 of the shares are owned by the club members, which isn't the perfect system, but it would have been a natural evolution of Rebecca's speech about what football means to the fans, I think. I'm not going to dwell on this point about endings though, there's other stuff I want to move on to next, but you know what comes before that, you know what's now. If you've been watching these videos, you know what happens now. Yes, World Anvil are still sponsoring me. This is a company I genuinely love. I'm going to keep promoting and supporting them as long as I physically can. And all of you are going to listen intently. World Anvil is an online tool for world building, character creation, story planning and writing, campaign building and playing lots of different games. A load of useful stuff. I use it for my novel with the sprawling mess all of my world building turned into, and even just like, I was keen on my fictional town having a strong sense of community, so there was pages after page of who lives where, what do they think of their neighbours, where do they work, what are their opinions on local gossip. I don't know, a very big sprawling mess that World Anvil can really help to organise with hyperlinks, different categories, timelines. You can even completely build out of your own designed calendars. Again, with hyperlinks attached to other articles and a map to link the different timeline events too, if you fancy that. When there is so much detail, it is hard to remember it all, and having something like this to just quickly glance at and see what happens where and when becomes so damn handy. And there are other tools as well. I've not used all of them yet myself, but all the ones I have used are pretty straightforward. They do have lots of tutorials for how to use everything, but I've never needed to watch them. I've just figured it out myself pretty easily. There is a link in the description, and as a pinned comment there is the code TREE, which entitles you to 40% off any of their yearly subscriptions. And if you want to try it out first, they have a free version. Test that out for as long as you like first. Get familiar with World Anvil. You know, if you're interested, click the link. World Anvil. So, the vast majority of what I've said about this show in all my videos has been really positive. I think that tends to be my approach, you know. I'm more inclined to forgive a story its faults if I can see what it's trying to do and I can appreciate the strengths. That said, I think at least for this one video, it feels like the right time to be slightly tougher on the show. And you know, there are many positives to this episode, some of which I've just discussed, some of which I don't think I need to discuss. I'm more interested to talk about the criticism this week, particularly one big flaw, I think the biggest flaw, which is Rupert's appearance in this show. Rupert here is very much the classic feel-good trope of the villain getting their comeuppance and it all being a fun chance to laugh at someone who deserved their downfall. And I just felt like that's at total odds with the themes of this show. I had talked twice about the idea of monsters becoming human again. Rupert has no real growth in himself this season though, but he he did change in Rebecca's eyes, and our eyes, from being this Emperor Palpatine into just being a man. A bit of a child, I suppose. Someone who can't scare Rebecca anymore. So I was kind of imagining we wouldn't see him this episode at all, because, yeah, he doesn't matter anymore. I feel like that's one character that doesn't need wrapping up. We heard rumours about inappropriate behaviour, we saw Bex and the assistant visiting Rebecca. We can very much infer how things have gone for him. I think that's enough. He doesn't matter enough for us to bother seeing anymore, as Rebecca somewhat emphasises.
Look, I'm sorry, I just genuinely don't care anymore.
In that sense, why bother bringing him back for Sassy to get in a few good insults, for fans to chant wanker, for him to swear at West Ham losing and push someone over and be all like the comic villain to laugh at? That makes it feel like we haven't moved on from him at all. Plus, it's so much screen time for a character that isn't really changing a great deal here. Plus, I think it cheapens the maturity of the show. It's fun to mock our enemies, maybe, but it's more fulfilling to move past them. I thought that was the point. And also, it does kind of leave you wondering, if Rupert is the downright villain to laugh at, what makes Jamie's dad so different? Or Nate's dad? This, I suppose, is why we can criticise the very concluded approach to the ending of this show. Having our final shots of Lloyd and of James Tart, them happily getting on well with their sons, I think that comes with an implication that everything is sorted between them, that it's all okay, that everything's resolved there. And I don't want to outright criticise this, because, yeah, they might be. Lloyd did apologise in a way that was quite heartfelt, and James in rehab is possibly quite different to the James from season 2. Roy asks in this episode if people can change, and yes, they can certainly grow. Have they though? Who knows? We haven't really seen them. I'm just conscious that there are a lot of people who have fathers that, even in spite of perhaps an apology or efforts in rehab or whatever, fathers that might not change so easily. That might be damaging to let back into your lives. You know, you can offer an apology in one moment and perhaps genuinely mean it, but still find yourself falling into similar behaviour. And I think we should definitely be empathetic to James and what no doubt remains a struggle to get a grip on his alcohol addiction. We can expect that might still be quite a long and difficult road, one that even might have ups and downs, but for someone who quite frankly suffered abusive behaviour from this man, who is still feeling the effects of that, is it safe for Jamie to let him back into his life? Does Jamie feel safe doing that? And for some the answer might be yes, for some no, but surely at the least we can make this clear that this is a confusing, difficult situation to find yourself in. One that could be dangerous. Forgiveness is difficult. I will forever praise this show for its attempts to explore that, however I also feel they've been in a rush to reach the nice moments of forgiveness this season. You know, where season 1 Jamie had a long time to organically develop, Nate has a rushed redemption this season, Lloyd and James even more rushed. And I think in rushing that, they've unintentionally made it look like just simply forgiving the people who hurt you will solve everything. I hope that makes sense. So that is a mark against this show in my books. We've half contradicted all the great ideas of forgiveness and liberation by making Rupert the comic villain, and by too magically resolving the Lloyd and James Tart relationships, when I think they could have easily ended the series emphasising that they were still a work in progress. But now let's discuss some other general thoughts. I really like in Nate's apology that when Ted cuts him off to forgive him, Nate insists on saying that he was sorry.
Listen, Ted. I know. It's okay. No, please, can you just let me say it?
I always think that kind of thing is important. You know, sometimes you need to actually express your, whatever the word is, remorse? Not remorse. Sometimes you need to express that, and just being given the apology isn't kind of cathartic in the same way. It doesn't give the same sense of conclusion there. God, I've expressed that badly. This is what happens when I derail off of the notes I've written. So to get back to them, of the Roy, Keeley, Jamie situation, I've said that before, that I love how this show refused to play up to the usual love triangle drama you get. These aren't three people locked in some over-the-top competition. They are three adults trying to navigate their feelings without it ruining their relationships. So in that sense, I was a little disappointed to see Roy and Jamie get in a fist fight over Keeley, but I'll forgive it for how it plays into this idea that yeah, Roy hasn't changed as much as he wanted to. That we all still sometimes let ourselves down. So, yeah, fine. Really though, I just wanted to say I'm glad Keeley got with neither of them. I think that is the best possible conclusion, and I actually quite like that if we are going to have some moment of Roy and Jamie demanding that she pick between them, if that is the case, then I think not showing her response is a good move. They didn't need to show it because we already know the obvious answer. Just cut straight to the two of them going, right, we were idiots, let's go for a kebab now. I don't like Nate being assistant to the kit man. I think with how well he did at West Ham, he has to be the manager ahead of Roy, surely. I get why a lot of you might like him being assistant kit man because having to work his way back up again, but I think you can do a lot of that kind of redemption in the actual relationships rather than in his job title. Perhaps, like, start this episode with Nate walking in for his first day at work as a coach, feeling nervous about what people will think, there being some slight awkwardness with others, him having to accept, okay, I'm back, but a lot has changed in a year, and people are still feeling a little cold towards me right now, that's okay. Like, remember how long it took Jamie to win people round on his return in season 2? I don't think it needs to be as big as that, because I think the idea is supposed to be that they've all grown more accepting and understanding, but even so, don't just fine him £5,000 and then move on, problem solved. Imply that it might take a little time to settle back in, but that he will get there, and that's okay. The table this episode showed us Richmond were on 85 points, which means my calculations last video were completely wrong. Well, not completely. There were 6 games unexplained and unaccounted for that I predicted must have been draws, and it turns out that they weren't. Nobody cares much though. I do think they missed a trick not finishing on the points Leicester did, but I'd have liked to have seen an extract from Trent's book. I kind of was expecting a voiceover from him, kind of like they did in season 1, you know? Instead, all we get is the title, so that was a bit of a shame. I'm very intrigued to know what Trent wrote. Oh, and here's another big point actually. What the hell are we meant to think about Michelle and Jake? Michelle left Ted and ended up dating their couple's therapist. The fact that makes Ted's earlier suggestion in season 2 that all the therapy sessions were the two of them just ganging up on Ted seem quite plausible. The therapist started dating one of his clients, and not once in the entire show is it mentioned how unethical this is. I kept waiting for it to be mentioned, for it to be addressed, or at least explained, but nothing. And so in that sense, I would not be surprised if this show puts a lot of people off couples therapy, and yeah, being a therapist myself, this kind of message does really bother me. But even then, what the hell are we meant to think this episode? Jake clearly isn't as into football as Michelle and Henry, fair enough. Then Ted is back in America and Jake is just nowhere to be seen anymore. It feels very unclear. Is she still dating Jake? In which case, how does Ted get on with Jake? Who lives where? What does Henry feel? Or is Jake out of the picture? In which case, why? Was not being that passionate about the football match a deal breaker for Michelle? Did she dump him for not celebrating the goals more? Are Michelle and Ted back together now maybe? In which case, that's a big leap forwards. I don't know, it just feels a little confusing. Ted's wife divorcing him and then getting with their ex-therapist is a big thing to happen to the main character in a show, and fair enough, there's a limit to how much they explore it when Ted is in a different country, but now we're ending with him going back home. It'd be nice to have some indication of where things might go next in relation to all of that. Okay, one last thing. Edwin Akufu vowed to never stop ruining Sam's life. I was very interested to see how they were planning to resolve that, because it's a very scary idea. Apparently though, Sam is now just in the national team again, so I guess Edwin just let it drop? I don't know if there's something subtle I missed here, can someone please point it out? But yeah, I was waiting for another chance to talk about Edwin, but it never came. How does Sam deal with a billionaire maliciously intent on ruining his life? That's such an interesting question to be immediately dropped by the show. Okay.
One more thing!
I didn't like having George Cartrick's balls be flashed for everyone to laugh at. It's just kind of an odd bit of humiliation to chuck into an episode that was otherwise quite a good one for his character, I think. I do like they brought him back. On the one hand, we see this show quite rightly humanise the awful experience of Keeley having nude sleep. But on the other hand, we get blokes' dicks being tied together with string and their balls being flashed. Do we need it? Look, there are other things to say. I know most of my points to this video have been critical ones, but that's just what I felt more interested to talk about this time. I still enjoyed the episode and consider it a strong ending. And I expect a lot of you do too. Let me know all the positive things I didn't discuss in this video. Put them in the comments. And if you do have any other thoughts, let me know. I myself just do have other thoughts. I think I'm going to do a big season wrap-up kind of video to discuss everything. So also comment the sort of stuff you'd like me to talk about in that, maybe things you'd like me to give my opinion on. Other than that, like this video, subscribe, maybe support me on Patreon if you fancy all of that, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Luke Hoare, Nujabes, Michael Gallagher, In Squares, Flying Spider, Kellyanne Davidson, Samara Salsi, Joshua C. Follier, Chad Bramwell and Michael Hart. Thank you.